Hello, everyone. Welcome this morning to the Lexington Historical Society. All right, this morning we have a really fun program for you. We are very excited to be hosting Sarah Jane Marsh, who is the author of Most Wanted, which is a book about John Hancock and Sam Adams. And Sarah has been kind enough to record some information about her book in anticipation of a book festival that she is participating in this weekend, which is going to be held on Twitter. So if anyone is interested at all in seeing that, Sarah is more than happy to take your questions about the history that she is going to talk about today, about the writing process, anything like that over the weekend. So I'm going to drop the link for that in the chat window. So if anyone would like to check that out, there are many wonderful authors who are going to be participating in this program, including our own local Serena Zabin on her history of the Boston Massacre, if anyone wasn't able to get to that program in March, which was our last live program before things went digital. All right, so without further ado, we are going to start screen share, and hopefully we will be able to run this video for you all and start thinking of those questions, and head over to historysummit.com for more information so that you can find out where to post those questions once you have them written down. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today. All of our programs for this Patriots Day week are being run for free, but if you are interested at any point in making a small donation to the Historical Society, all you have to do is go to lexingtonhistory.org/give, and that link will also be down in the chat as well. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Happy Patriots Day. My name is Sarah Jane Marsh, and I am the author of Most Wanted, the revolutionary partnership of John Hancock and Samuel Adams, out March 2020 from Little and Brown Books. And thank you to Lexington Historical Society for hosting. I am going to share a behind-the-scenes look at the making of Most Wanted. So let's get started. This picture book biography covers 10 years of American Revolution history through the odd couple political partnership of Hancock and Adams. And our illustrator, Edwin Fotheringham, who's an Cyber Award winner, did a fantastic job depicting this history, starting from the Stamp Act. We go through the rioting, resistance, rebellion in Boston, to the town hall meetings, and look at this gorgeous image of Old South Meeting House. It is fantastic. And this building has been preserved for the public to visit. So thank you to Revolutionary Spaces for that. And the book goes all the way through the fighting at Lexington and Concord, which is the history that we are remembering today. I have always loved history and reading, writing, stories. I was able to incorporate all of that in my first book, Thomas Paine and the Dangerous Word, about the writer behind the scandalous pamphlet, Common Sense. And thanks to Ben Edwards from Walking Boston, he shared with me this picture of my book when it came out in Old South Meeting House, actually. So thank you, Ben. It's pretty awesome to see the book alongside David McCullough. Pretty cool. So what was the original idea for Most Wanted? Well, I knew I wanted to do a prequel history-wise to Thomas Paine. And my original idea was to focus on the chaotic events inside the Hancock Clark house the night before the fighting in Lexington and Concord. Beautiful picture of Hancock Clark House, of course, owned by the Lexington Historical Society. So thank you for preserving that, keeping history alive. And who was in the house that night? John Hancock. Oh, Samuel Adams. Look, I can almost like touch his cheek. They were in the house. We know that Paul Revere showed up that night. Not many people know that William Dawes showed up that night, was also in the house. Oh, and then Hancock's fiancée, Dorothy Quincy, was there, as well as her chaperone, Hancock's Aunt Lydia. Of course, we had Reverend Clark himself, who owned and lived in the house with his wife, Lucy Clark, and they had 9 children in the house that night. Can you imagine how crowded that was? And of course, outside were these guys, the Lexington militia, guarding the house in case General Gage and his British Army snuck out to perhaps try and arrest Hancock and Adams. Thank you to the Lexington Minutemen for this picture from your website and for keeping history alive. We appreciate it. But after a trial and error, I decided to focus really on the partnership of John Hancock and Samuel Adams. And it turns out these two were associated with a lot of the big hits or key events in American Revolution history, especially around Boston. So these are all events that we were able to cover in Most Wanted. Everything from the Stamp Act, Townsend Acts, Boston Massacre, Liberty Riots, Tea Party, Coercive Acts, Continental Congress. We even have the Massachusetts Provincial Congress in there, and of course Lexington and Concord. And I really wanted to focus on specifically the 10 years of trouble that these two caused, to the point that in June 1775, General Gage issued a proclamation pardoning all the rowdy colonists except for Hancock and Adams. So this is where our story is going, to essentially both these gentlemen being landing at the top of Great Britain's Most Wanted list. This became the story of Most Wanted. Research. Ooh, this is my favorite part. I read a lot of books, and secondary sources are written by people who were not alive at the time, but they give me great context, understanding, details. I can read very broad, and I can also read very deep. Especially helpful to me was this book, The Road to Concord by J.L. Bell. This provided a lot of understanding, a lot of updated research on why Lexington and Concord happened. And another local history, super helpful, was The Patriot Parson of Lexington, Massachusetts, written by Richard Colon, who I know is dear to the Lexington Historical Society. So thank you for those books. Primary sources, though, are my true love. Look at this beautiful letter book that belonged to John Hancock, and that's his handwriting. We also can see the handwriting and hear the real words from Paul Revere himself. This is his letter and his testimony as to his ride to Lexington that night. And just as a reminder, his house has also been preserved to visit by, I think it's the Paul Revere Memorial Association runs the Paul Revere House. So thank you to you all. Oh, and this was a real thrill. Through Interlibrary Loan, I was able to get the correspondence of Thomas Gage and read all of the general's letters and really get an understanding that he did not indicate a desire to arrest Hancock and Adams or any type of orders directly to make that happen in his writing. So that was helpful to read. I also wanted to contrast these two men, especially for my young readers. And I know they both went to Harvard, but we know that Hancock received VIP treatment at Harvard because of his family's social status. However, there's many accounts that Adams had to work at Harvard as a waiter because his family had some financial difficulty when Parliament closed down or outlawed his father's land bank business. But was Samuel Adams really a waiter at Harvard? Well, there's lots of secondary sources that indicate that he was, but you can't always trust secondary sources, and facts are stubborn things. And I had this tantalizing clue from Sibley's Harvard Graduates, where in a footnote, the author stated that this was a case of mistaken identity. It was not Sam Adams, who was a waiter at college, but instead another Harvard student named Joseph Adams. Well, there was only one way to know for sure, and that was to contact Harvard University directly. So I emailed them, and the good researchers there replied back that indeed it was a case of mistaken identity, that their faculty records show that it was not Samuel Adams, but Joseph Adams, who was employed as a waiter. So, mystery solved. That was very satisfying, but it also was frustrating because I had already constructed a compare and contrast paragraph with both men, and I had to completely rewrite that. So that was annoying. But it's important to do your research, which brings me to pre-write and writing. I like to start with a spiral notebook. There's really no pressure there. And I take notes as I research. I start to construct a timeline to keep track of what happened when. I also start to gather quotes that I would love to use. There's always way too many quotes that I want to incorporate into a book. I also start to compare and contrast both characters and get an idea of how they were similar, how they were different. And I start to get a sense of some story beats that I would like to include. And as always, I am compiling a never-ending list of more research that I need to do. But at some point, you have to take a break from researching and actually start writing. And it takes me many, many drafts because writing for children, especially history, is very challenging because history is complex. And I only have about 2,000 words in which to convey my story. So each word has to count and has to be engaging and move the story along. So I really love working with those constraints. It's like my own personal Sudoku puzzle. I even do mock-ups of my book because as a picture book writer, it's really important that my story works on the page. So you can see my stick figure drawings down there. That gives me a sense of scene and pacing. And then I actually print out my manuscript, cut it up into pieces, and tape it onto like a pretend book or a book dummy to get a sense of page turns, how long each scene lasts. And often I find that I've written a scene too long and I have to edit it down. But finally, after all of this work, and for me, with Most Wanted, this was 2 years of work, I finally have a completed manuscript and I send it off to my literary agent. And in this case, she sent it to Disney Hyperion. And ta-da! Oh, that's so satisfying. They agreed to purchase and publish my manuscript Most Wanted, which is pretty fantastic because even Mickey Mouse reads books. And also, Disney was the publisher of my previous book, Thomas Paine. So I was working with the same team again, and I was really excited about that. Disney asked if Ed wanted to illustrate Most Wanted, and he said yes. So I was thrilled. We were going to continue on with 2 books together. So very excited about that. And then here is my editor, Rotem Moskovich, who is fantastic. She also really cares about historical accuracy and integrity and gives me a lot of freedom too as an author, which I love. And here she is visiting the Hancock Clark house, making some noise a la Paul Revere. And our assistant editor, Heather Crawley, here is some social media she did on the release of our book. She actually dressed up as John Hancock. She has an interesting connection, family-wise, to Lexington and Concord. Her 9th grandfather was Jason Russell of the Jason Russell House, which has been preserved by the Arlington Historical Society. And that was a kind of a bloody spot during Lexington and Concord. And this winter, though, I had a bit of a surprise when the parent company of Disney Hyperion sold 1,000 of their titles to Little and Brown. So in March, my book, Most Wanted, was actually transferred to Little and Brown, and they are the publisher now. So, surprise! I miss my Disney team, but I am excited to be part of Little and Brown's spectacular nonfiction list. Revision. This is hard work, and I could do a whole presentation just on revision. But I work with my editors over numerous drafts to really tighten up the story, clarify the story, make it as strong as it can be. We also do back matter, which is an afterword, author's note, source notes, bibliography, timeline. That all requires a lot of work. So revision takes, like another year in itself. And unfortunately, there's only so much history that you can fit into a 2,000-word picture book, but you can put more history in the back matter. So we went all out with Most Wanted because I really wanted readers to have a more nuanced understanding of the events around Lexington and Concord. So here are some of the subjects that we address in the back matter of the book, including Hancock's famous signature. And we didn't forget the salmon, because of course we have to include the salmon story. That is just Lexington gold. So I am pleased it's in there. Fact-checking. So Disney does have their own fact-checkers, but they invite me to suggest historians that might have more specific knowledge of the time period that we're talking about, and no one knows this history better than J.L. Bell, John Bell, who runs the Boston 1775 blog, which I have been reading for years. So Disney asked if he would fact check, and he graciously agreed. And I just knew we were in good hands, and I was absolutely delighted. So to see his summaries of both the manuscript and the artwork was fascinating. It really enriched my understanding, and we had a lot of good discussion with my editorial team afterwards. And it's a real challenge because, yes, we are talking about the Stamp Act in about 35 words. And this is tough for any fact checker too, understanding that we can't give the detailed understanding that's often needed or wanted in an adult book. And we also have a little more leeways, especially with illustrations, to have fun with things and make things lively. So thank you to John for fact checking. Just brilliant. Illustrations. Oh, this is my favorite part. Let's just dive right in. Okay, Hancock Clark House. We do about 3 or 4 passes of illustrations, and most people don't know that the author and the illustrator rarely talk to each other or engage at all during the process. Everything goes through the editor. So I do send Ed some context, a document with some how things might look or some images to give him some research to use. But ultimately everything goes through the editor. And then he sends back maybe 3 or 4 sets of drawings that go through the editor to me. And Disney's been very good about letting me comment back and give some feedback. So we work together as a team, but Ed is amazing, just amazing. So here we have the Hancock Clark house. Thanks to Richard Cullen, we know exactly how many kids were in the house that night, and there were 9. So here they're arriving. The next one, we just had Hancock and Adams engage a little bit more with the family. I love Sam Adams' expression here. He actually was very good with kids, but it's kind of fun to play with his character a little bit and have him look kind of grumpy or serious. And then we move on to color, where it really comes alive. Now, this almost was our final art, except if you notice, the color of the house is not correct. And that is actually my fault, because the image I sent off to Ed was the old brown color. And it wasn't until pretty late in the process we realized that house needed to be yellow. That's the actual color it was in this time. So we got that fixed. Beautiful picture by Ed. Here's another fun one. Now we're inside the house. Let's see, we have John Hancock, rebel in ruffles, realized danger was calling. He polished his pistol. He sharpened his sword. He was determined to take the field and fight. That is not our business, replied Adams. The discussion took hours. And it did. I love this first sketch so much. We see both gentlemen, and doesn't Hancock look cool? I just think he looks really great. I think he would love this picture, actually. But we needed him to look a little more ridiculous, because he was kind of being ridiculous. And remember, that house was crowded, so we needed more people in there. The next version has, you named it, we've got Paul Revere right there, which is fantastic. And who's that standing next to him? Anyone know? Ooh, I'm really excited because I advocated for this. We've got William Dawes actually in the picture. Yes. And we have Reverend Clark in the back. Not totally identifiable yet. And then you could really have fun with the people in the back. I mean, is that Sergeant Monroe? Is that Lucy Clark? Lots of ways we could go. One issue here was the size of Hancock's pistol. We weren't sure that was correct. That required some more research, which was adjusted in the next picture. Now we have Pastor Clark looking a little more mature. The pistol, beautiful final art for this scene. I just love Ed's drawings so much. Then the last part of the book I worked on just the summer before launch, and that was the author's note. And I redrafted this several times because as we were writing and working on Most Wanted, I continued to read and learn, especially about the lives that are typically left out of our traditional histories that we share. And the more I read, the more I realized that I also had a narrow view of history and really needed to expand and be considering those beyond just the founding fathers who I traditionally write about. We are missing the voices of the African Americans who were enslaved at the time, the women, and of course the native nations who were here first. So in my 10-year history, no matter how updated or lively, engaging, we don't even cover that in the story itself. And so in the 5 years that it has taken to bring this book from the original idea to being published, I've grown a lot as a writer, as a historian. And so I really worked hard on my author's note, which I hope you read, to show readers how I wrestled with these issues and how I think the book should be read and used in the future. And speaking of reading books, here are some that I highly recommend. An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. This is that view from the shore that we are really lacking in a lot of our histories. This is a young people's version. There's also an adult version. Stamped. This also came out from Little and Brown the same month as my book. This is Jason Reynolds' remix of Dr. Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, which is a fantastically researched, deep history of racism in the United States. And of course, picture books. Like The Undefeated, so powerful. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Never Caught by Dr. Erica Armstrong Dunbar, who really showed us the life of Ona Judge, somebody who has been left out of the history books until now. And that's one of the enslaved, one of the people that George Washington enslaved. And anyway, I could go on and on and on and talk about this, but please check out the author's note. In conclusion, I wanted to leave you with some activities. A historical scavenger hunt. Can you find these in Most Wanted? This beautiful portrait of Hancock by John Singleton Copley, which hangs in Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, along with Samuel Adams. See if you can spot them in the book. How about Hancock's red velvet jacket that you can see sometimes at the Boston State House? It might be downstairs being preserved. I think they bring it out at certain times. Take a look and see if you can spot Prince Estabrook. He was one of the Lexington militia members on the field that morning in Lexington. He is African American. He was enslaved and was one of the first to be wounded that morning. See if you can spot him. And we have one of the Hancock or Adams cannons in the book as well. See if you can spot those. And Hancock's golden carriage, which you can see down at the Quincy homestead in Massachusetts. See if you can spot that in the book. Phyllis Wheatley, the famous poet, she has a cameo in there. The old State House. Ooh, so gorgeous. And right behind me, see if you can spot one of Hancock's trunks, which actually is on display at the Worcester Historical Museum. Oh, and lastly, don't forget to peek under the book cover. I'll show you underneath the book cover of Thomas Paine. Here's Thomas Paine. If you look under the cover, Ed, or the illustrator, created the case cover of Common Sense. Super cool. So take a peek under Most Wanted and see if maybe General Gage has the last word. So thank you so much to the Lexington Historical Society for hosting me today. I want to encourage you all to support your local museums, your local historical sites, whether with a donation or a membership. And if you're interested in purchasing these books or any other books, please consider ordering from your local independent bookstore. They could also really use your business during this time. And many of them are participating online at bookshop.com. So thank you again for having me, and have a great rest of your Patriots Day. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks so much, everyone who was listening today. I am going to once again attempt to send a couple of links to you guys because I'm not sure if they made it into the chat the last time. But if you are interested in asking any questions of Sarah, feel free to contact her as part of History Summit, which is happening on Saturday. So you can find some more information at that website. We would like to thank her so much for sending us this information, to reaching out to us for this Patriots Day. She's helped us to expand our programming incredibly so that we can have something to offer to you every single day this week. And she did also mention a really wonderful website that I think some folks may not have seen already. If you have not, I would highly recommend it. And that is the Boston 1775 website, which is run by J.L. Bell, one of our local historians. And so you can find all sorts of extra fun historical tidbits there. So that concludes our program for this morning. We will be back to you over the course of the day with some more fun scavenger hunts and things on our website, as well as a live tour of Buckman Tavern tomorrow. So I hope you can continue to join us to celebrate this Patriots Day week. And thank you so much for tuning in.